Well, today I'm going to cut up some of my scrap fabrics. I've gathered quite a bit, and as you can see, I have organized them by size. So these strips will be cut with my tenderly stitched ruler, and here we have the neutrals as well. So I have the opportunity to fussy cut these little devils, and you know that mouse was devilish too. So collectively, those were two devilish pieces of fabric, of course. Jerry is back a blast from my past, so I definitely have to have him in my scrap quilt. I love how cheery he is, but you remember how devilish he was, always poking fun at Tom. So I'm going to use this fabric as much as possible, i.e., I'm going to cut up as much of him as I can. I'm going to fussy cut through my clear, tenderly stitched scrap busting fabrics to make sure that I get his face in the right spot. So see that? I caught his angry look right there, which I'm going to love seeing in my scrap quilt. You may think from scale, because you can see that this is 1.5 inch squares there, that he will not be noticed in a scrap quilt. But I promise you, when you pull it up to yourself, you will notice things like him. And but from afar, if you have done any amount of color placement, all you will read is the gray fabric, because when you do color placement, you effectively are creating your own fabric, and your eye just sees everything blended together. But similar to other I Spy type quilts, or things that you probably know from other forms of art and crafts, once you bring it up to your eye a little bit closer, you do start to see the detail that's present. And I love the fact that when I bring my quilts up close to myself, I can see all the things that I've taken the time to fussy cut. You've noticed that I've been turning my smaller mat on top of my big mat. I like to do that because it allows me to move the mat instead of the fabric, and that means I can accurately cut, betterly accurately cut. Oop, I see the Mad Hatter right there. I definitely have to get him. So with more accurate cutting, that means that I have better piecing and I'll sew better. So I try not to move my fabric as much as possible. You'll notice I also have the Handi Quilter grip tape on the back of my rulers. That's my favorite one because it's clear and it's a full tape strip. That means I can run it straight down the middle of my ruler, and it is running the full length of that ruler. So I have optimal sturdiness of my ruler when I place it down on top of a fabric. And normally I cut 4 to 6 pieces of fabric at one time, so I really need my rulers to stay sturdy. Now I can do 6 pieces of fabric at one time with a new blade, but with an older blade, more like 4. So just want to clarify that. I wish I could have been able to get that cat, but it looks like I'm going to go for the skull here, and I'm okay with that because that little piece is a bit big enough, and I think I'm going to go back to that cat. I wish I had enough of the fabric to get that dragon, but that's okay. I'm going to be happy with the skull. So that piece of fabric was not big enough for me to use the larger ruler first, so I just straight went to my small rectangle, which that rectangular ruler is 2 by 3.5 inch uh, rectangle shape. I'm not sure if I mentioned that earlier. Now, you might think 2 inch squares are quite small, but there are a number of vintage quilt patterns that use them. So when I have the opportunity to cut 2 inch squares, I go for it. I use my 2.5 inch squares in a complete different set of quilts, not normally in my scrap quilts, because usually I color coordinate those and do some other quilts with those. Anyway, back to the 2.5 inch squares. I told you I was going to get that little piece of fabric just right, and that I was going to get something else out of it. So I've got some sort of devilish girl underneath there. I can't see quite from this distance, but I'm going to get that I think that might even be her on a motorcycle or something like that. Something fun, something that's just going to add interest to the quilt. So, and that's what I like. I like my scrap quilts to have as much interest as possible. That is a wad of old batting. Batting is the best thing to pick up any kind of dust, debris. So I just ball mine up. Sometimes I need to run a little stitch all the way through just to hold it together. But effectively, I've got free cleaning sponges out of my leftover batting. So here I have a stack of fabric. Don't sure if I mentioned earlier that I do make sure that I starch and press my fabrics. I line them up as best as possible so that I can optimize my cuts. And as you can see, I am cutting this stack with the longer tenderly stitched scrap busting ruler first, and then I'm going to go in with the smaller ruler, which is 2 by 3.5 inches in size. You can see the tape very clearly right there that I was mentioning earlier. Now I can position my ruler quite neatly and make those cuts. I tell you again, I love being able to turn around my smaller ruler on a mat, excuse me, on top of my larger one, and look at that, a nice stack of fabric. I think that was about 4 there. So those strings on the right hand side that you see that I've maintained, oh, I've maintained that piece too. I know you're thinking to yourself, those are really tiny pieces, Tina. What are you going to do with them? Well, I'm going to show you a number of things to do with those. Those little bits will be used as my leaders and enders, which were made popular by Bonnie Hunter, of course. And I think she was spot on with that for sure. So I save all my little bits so that they could be my leaders and enders. And oddly enough, those pieces for me usually wind up to be at least 1 inch wide, maybe 1.5 inches. And once I gather them and use them, then I can actually do something with those as well. Anyway, cleaning that mat once again. I keep my surface nice and clean. I know it might seem like I'm doing, oh, look at that. That's just a very small amount of waste. Now it's time to put the quilt block together. Did you catch the name of that? Courthouse Steps quilt block. This is a vintage quilt block, which is log cabin base. You work it from the middle out and you work it in rounds, just like other log cabin blocks. This vintage block is one of my favorites because for this size rectangle, which again is 2 by 3.5 inch rectangle, it uses up 18 rectangles, which means I get to go through my scraps quite quickly through by using this block. And it's easy sewing. As you've heard me say in several of my other quilt videos, I love easy, mindless sewing when it comes to my scrap quilts. They relax me, there's no stress, and they come together quickly. And because it uses up 18 pieces, that means this is a really good size block. I don't need many of these blocks to come together in order to generate a throw or even a twin size quilt. I want to say my target for this particular quilt is about 60 of them. And I do believe I have enough black and white fabrics for this monochromatic quilt block layout, as well as overall monochromatic quilt that I'm going to make. Now, of course, you could pick any color you want with respect to monochromaticness. You can do a blue quilt, a red quilt, a white quilt. Actually, you can even do say a two-tone. So you'll see one of my reels maybe recently where I did a pink and green stack. Now, obviously, that was for a specific sorority, the AKA sorority, and someone I know who wants those pink and green fabrics. So when I went through my scraps, I pulled them all out, just like I pulled out all of the black and whites for this particular quilt. I don't have a more modern looking quilt, or rather I'd say I don't have many modern looking quilts in my personal collection. So that is actually one of the reasons why I did this. Either way, no matter what colorway you choose, whether it's monochromatic, whether it's two-tone, maybe you even go for a rainbow theme in your layout of your colors, or just completely scrappy all over. Your quilt will look gorgeous, I promise you, because you've taken the time to distribute the colors and place them in a particular order. Look at that, the middle is done already. Have you been paying attention to the video? Did you realize that I stitched from the middle out? So like I said, this block, like other log cabin quilt blocks, are worked from the end round. So you start in the middle, then you complete the first round by going from top to bottom and then side to side. So here I am, on the second round, and I am again at the top. I'm going to then do the bottom. I hope you realize from the wording that the top is my black rectangles and the bottom is my black rectangles, and the white rectangles, of course, is my left and my right. So again, this block sews together so easily that I don't even have to think about it. And the wonderful thing about scrap quilts is I'm not worried about directionality, even if there is some directional fabrics being used. Everything is just going together. You could take that extra time to make sure all of your directional fabrics are oriented one way or the other. Now look at that. The quilt block is done.